unfolding. The threat of the seditious conspiracy is now unfolding in the seditious conspiracy trial. And that's the second thing I want to talk about. We learned quite a bit of extra information from many Oath Keepers yesterday. And in one of the messages after January 6th, Mr. Caldwell said, this is from NBC, if we had guns, I guarantee we would have killed 100 politicians. Well, that is state of mind evidence. And then we find out that Stuart Rhodes informed an Oath Keeper that he was in contact with a Secret Service agent. John Zimmerman said he heard the other end of the phone call and said he was under the impression that Rhodes was in contact with a Secret Service agent. In response, the Secret Service told NBC News that we are aware that individuals from Oath Keepers have contacted us in the past to make inquiries. As part of our protective mission, we will establish an overall security plan, including traffic and crowd management protocols at venues where a protectee is scheduled to visit, the spokesperson said. As part of this effort, it is not uncommon for various organizations to contact us concerning security restrictions and activities that are permissible in proximity of our protected sites. The spokesperson emphasized that regardless of organization affiliation, no weapons of any kind are allowed inside Secret Service protected site or venue. Only sworn law enforcement officials who are actively participating in the security plan are allowed to have weapons at that location. So that statement, if you, in the court of public opinion, if you put that together with this idea, this defense of the Insurrection Act being invoked by Donald Trump, and somehow that automatically, or Donald somehow proclaims that he is now, deputizing Oath Keepers, Proud Boys, and 3%ers to become well-regulated militias, you see that there's a process here that the Secret Service talks about, that they have to be licensed to only sworn law enforcement officials actively participating in the security plan. That is Secret Service, but that applies to any sort of armed protective service that serves on behalf of the government. Okay, so invocation of this Insurrection Act would have meant if Donald Trump had deputized Oath Keepers, that the Oath Keepers would then become a law enforcement organization of the United States. It's the most alarming thing if you really put all these things together and see what their mind was all about. So we also learned that a member of the Oath Keepers was also in contact with Andrew Giuliani in 2020. Andrew Giuliani is Rudy Giuliani's son. Mr. Zimmerman didn't know if Rhodes had direct contact with Trump. The record would suggest that he did not, but did point out the Secret Service connection when asked how they would know if Trump invoked the Insurrection Act. I want you to pay attention to that because I was talking about how we will find out about the plan. How would Stuart Rhodes have known that Donald Trump invoked the Insurrection Act and deputized them? And here there's an inkling that the contact with the Secret Service would have been the liaison. And who in that is we don't know yet. We do know that two people who were talked about in Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony have since resigned, one of them being Tony Ornato, who was a Secret Service agent for Donald Trump for 2 years and then left and then came back as Deputy Chief of Staff, which is a rare, I don't think it's ever happened before that you go from Secret Service to Deputy Chief of Staff. So it's an ominous place, and the Secret Service should be in a lot of trouble. They should not only have an internal review of this, but congressional oversight as well as DOJ should start looking into this. Another witness testified that he began to start questioning whether he needed to be a member of Oathkeepers after the organization published 2 open letters to Trump in December, which called upon Trump to invoke the Insurrection Act. So we don't really know whether that was part of this open letter was part of the act of blame shifting onto the Oathkeepers, that they were the ones who wanted Trump to invoke the Insurrection Act, or whether there's a lot to uncover there that we will know that who was it that brought up the Insurrection Act, and who was it that put this plan into motion to the point where extremist groups were ready to attack Congress and did attack Congress. So in the open letter in December 14, 2020, coincidentally on the day that I issued my 3rd warning about Donald Trump's seditious conspiracy, the open letter calls on Trump to invoke the Insurrection Act, saying that millions of American military and law enforcement veterans and many millions more loyal, patriotic American gun owners stand ready to answer your calls to arms and obey your orders to get this done. Then another one from December 23rd, 2020, tens of thousands of patriotic Americans, both veterans and non-veterans, will already be in Washington, D.C., and many of us will have our mission critical gear stowed nearby just outside DC. And we will answer the call right then and there if you call on us. This specific type of detailing in these letters suggests it's orchestrated to the point where it almost, I would be very interested in knowing where that idea originated. So now we find out that there were people, and there were actual Oath Keepers, or people who were part of the Oath Keepers or who were in the periphery of the Oath Keepers, who called the FBI about to tip off about what was happening with the Oath Keepers. So, another former Oath Keepers member testifies that he tried to tip off the FBI and other officials after he recorded an Oath Keepers call he was concerned about in November of 2020 before January 6th. Did anyone call you back? Yeah, after it all happened. And there have been many people who have voiced their dissatisfaction with this. And this is from NBC News. And journalists and nobodies like me tipped and sent messages on every platform that was available to me, and to let them know that this is happening in plain view. This needs to be stopped. And in the very least, this needs to be surveilled. Excuse me. At the Oath Keepers trial, this is NPR. At the Oath Keepers trial, we're now hearing from heavy equipment mechanic and former military service member Abdullah Rashid, who recorded a November 9, 2020 virtual call because the more I listened to the call, it sounded like we were going to war with the United States government. Rashid says he heard so many threats on the call, he reached out to the FBI, the DC Attorney General, the Capitol Police, but no one got back to him until after it happened at the Capitol. That story, countless people can say. The Twitter employee who testified at the January 6th committee, the countless people, including myself, who warned FBI, US attorneys, and ODNI, and anybody else who would listen, and Twitter countless times. God knows how many times I've been suspended from Twitter. And not once has it been for anything that is remotely a national security issue. Yet, even to this day, national security threats are spreading lies all over Twitter, and Twitter still fails to properly moderate on the basis of their terms of use. So it's not just Twitter, it's institutional. It's an institutional rut, not rot. It's a rut. It's a bottleneck. It's a bureaucratic generalization, standardization, a result of that. It is so it's this idea that people reached out and gave tips and warned as much as they could, but nobody listened until after it happened. Rashid also says, from what I understood, it sounded like we were going to overthrow the US government and beat Antifa. So this idea that Antifa was going to be there, remember, this opposition element that would help them light that spark. Thank God that we didn't go there and cause that. So they needed somebody to fight, but nobody showed up. So they went ahead with the assault anyway, jumping the gun and attacking the US government without the legal cover of Antifa attacking them and them just being there to protest, despite having planned this whole thing. Do you see what I mean? So if Antifa was there, if there were any protest or counter protesters to MAGA that day, it would have been a whole different story. Whole different story. Because these extremist militia groups would not have any qualms about lethal force on non-MAGA protesters and counter protesters. One new update about the seditious conspiracy cases. This is separate from the Oathkeepers case, but Jeremy Bertino, one of the leaders of the Proud Boys, has pled guilty to seditious conspiracy and has agreed to cooperate with federal authorities, which does not bode well for Enrique Tarrio. And I've been talking about Enrique Tarrio for quite some time. That man is in trouble. Not that he wasn't before, but here are some excerpts that I found to be important from Mr. Bertino's plea and his testimony, because he testified at the January 6th committee. Would you say that the Proud Boys numbers increased after the stand back, stand by comment? That was during the election debate with President Joe Biden, who is now President Joe Biden. Jeremy Bertino, exponentially. I'd say tripled, probably. Cop Tifa, per plea agreement submitted today in seditious conspiracy case of Jeremy Bertino, ahead of January 6th, the Proud Boys increasingly viewed police as the enemy and referred to the police as Cop Tifa. So there's this bleeding and morphing of making the police part of Antifa. So any sort of aggression towards MAGA protesters who were breaking into Capitol grounds by police was also inundatedly trained to be considered enemies, Cop Tifa, like Antifa, right? And that gives you a state of mind of what they entered with. And they were there leading the charge and having that stack formation. So the plea agreement, it says Jeremy Bertino did knowingly combine, conspire, confederate, and agree with Ethan Nordine, Joseph Biggs, Zachary Real, Charles Donahue, Enrique Tarrio, Dominic Pizzola, and other persons known and unknown, important because we want to know who those unknowns are, to oppose by force the authority of the government of the United States and to delay by force the execution of the laws governing the transfer of power, including the 12th Amendment to the Constitution, Title 3, Section 15 of the United States Code. Okay? So that's where we are with the seditious conspiracy trials.